The evening was perfect, or so it seemed. The grand hall was alive with the sounds of clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and occasional bursts of laughter. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm, golden light, their glow reflecting off polished marble floors and intricately carved furniture. Tables were adorned with elegant floral centerpieces, their soft fragrances mingling with the rich aroma of gourmet dishes being served by impeccably dressed staff. The atmosphere radiated sophistication and success, a celebration of wealth and power where every detail seemed calculated to impress. This was no ordinary gathering, it was a stage set for the elite, where reputations were burnished and connections solidified. Amid the sea of accomplished individuals, the CEO stood out effortlessly. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying, exuding a quiet confidence that made him both intimidating and captivating. His tailored suit fit perfectly, the fabric whispering of luxury and precision, while his every gesture spoke of control and authority. When he spoke, people listened, not just out of respect for his position but because he had a way of making his words seem like pearls of wisdom. His presence was magnetic, drawing the admiration of men and the interest of women, but tonight, his focus was elsewhere. His gaze often flickered toward the young woman by his side, a subtle but undeniable sign of his interest. She, in turn, was glowing. Dressed in an elegant evening gown that highlighted her natural beauty, she seemed to float through the evening with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her heart swelled with pride and anticipation. After all, being here by his side felt like a validation of her dreams and aspirations. She had envisioned this moment countless times, imagining herself as the perfect partner for a man of his stature. Tonight, she was determined to make an impression, to show not just him but everyone present that she belonged in this world of opulence and power. Yet, beneath her polished exterior, there was a flicker of doubt, a quiet voice wondering if she truly knew the man she admired so deeply. In the corner of the room, almost hidden in plain sight, was the child. At first glance, they seemed like any other young guest reluctantly attending an adult event, their small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the surroundings. But there was something unusual about their presence, a familiarity in the way they watched the CEO, as if they were waiting for the right moment to approach him. They moved with a curious mix of shyness and confidence, their eyes darting between the adults with a sharpness that belied their age. To most, the child was simply an odd detail in an otherwise seamless evening, but to the observant, there was an unspoken question. What was their connection to the man of the hour? As the evening progressed, subtle clues began to emerge, each one a thread in a tapestry of suspense. The CEO, usually unflappable, seemed momentarily distracted when the child crossed his line of sight. It was a fleeting moment, gone almost as quickly as it came, but it left a faint ripple in the air. The girl, too engrossed in her thoughts of the future, failed to notice these small inconsistencies, her attention firmly fixed on making the night a success. Yet, for those attuned to the undercurrents of the room, there was a sense that something unexpected was brewing, an invisible tension that hinted at secrets waiting to surface. The interplay of these elements, the dazzling setting, the commanding CEO, the starry-eyed girl, and the enigmatic child, created an atmosphere ripe with possibilities. It was the kind of night where anything could happen, where the veneer of perfection could shatter with a single revelation. And though no one could predict the storm that was about to unfold, the stage was set, and the players were in their places. The truth, buried beneath layers of appearances and assumptions, was poised to make its dramatic entrance, forever altering the lives of those at the center of the evening's events. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed symphony, every note striking the right chord. The CEO moved effortlessly through the crowd, his charm and magnetism drawing people toward him like moths to a flame. His laugh, deep and resonant, punctuated the conversations he engaged in, leaving those around him hanging on his every word. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority tempered by an unexpected warmth that made even the most mundane topics sound fascinating. He was a man who had mastered the art of connection, knowing exactly when to flash a disarming smile or nod thoughtfully to signal his attentiveness. His confidence was unshakable, yet he wielded it with grace, making those in his orbit feel both seen and valued. For the girl, watching him work the room was a revelation. She stood slightly to the side, allowing herself a moment to admire him without interruption. To her, he wasn't just the most successful man in the room. He was a glimpse into the life she had always dreamed of. She imagined herself by his side in the long term, navigating these glittering events together as partners. Her heart swelled with pride every time someone approached him, whether to seek advice or simply bask in his presence. Each interaction reinforced her belief that he was everything she had ever wanted: strong, capable, and endlessly charismatic. She could already picture the life they would build, the homes they would share, the places they would travel, the legacy they would create. In her mind, this evening was a step closer to that future, a confirmation that they were on the right path. The other guests added to the evening's lively tapestry, their interactions creating a dynamic, ever-changing tableau. Industry titans exchanged anecdotes and traded subtle jabs cloaked in humor, each vying to outshine the other in a battle of wits. Younger professionals, eager to prove themselves, hovered at the edges of these conversations, hoping to catch a moment of attention from the more seasoned attendees. The air buzzed with a mix of ambition, camaraderie, and just a hint of rivalry. Laughter rippled through the room at regular intervals, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and murmured toasts to success. This was more than just a social gathering. It was a convergence of influence and opportunity, where connections were forged and reputations cemented. Amid this swirl of activity, the child's presence was an anomaly that quietly drew attention. While most of the guests dismissed them as a minor distraction, there was something about their demeanor that caught the occasional curious glance. Unlike other children who might have clung to a parent or sulked in a corner, this one seemed oddly self-assured. They moved through the room with a sense of purpose, their small frame almost disappearing among the towering adults. Occasionally, their gaze would land on the CEO, lingering just a fraction longer than expected. There was a peculiar intensity in their eyes, as if they were trying to decode something or waiting for a cue that only they could see. To most, this behavior was little more than a quirk, but to the keen observer, it hinted at a deeper connection. The girl, caught up in her own whirlwind of emotions, barely noticed the child. Her focus remained on the CEO and the impression they were making as a couple. She relished the approving glances from other guests, the murmured compliments about their chemistry and her elegance. Each word of praise felt like a small victory, a validation of her place in his world. She was determined to make the most of this evening, to prove not just to him but to herself that she belonged here. Yet, beneath her polished exterior, there was a flicker of unease, an almost imperceptible sense that something was slightly off. She couldn't pinpoint the source of this feeling, dismissing it as pre-event jitters or the natural tension of being in such a high-stakes environment. As the evening progressed, the interactions grew more intricate, and the atmosphere began to shift subtly. The CEO, usually unflappable, seemed momentarily distracted during a conversation with an old business associate. His eyes flickered briefly toward the child, a shadow of recognition crossing his face before he recovered his composure. It was a fleeting moment, so quick that most would have missed it, but for those paying attention, it was enough to spark curiosity. The child, too, seemed to grow bolder as the night went on, their movements becoming more deliberate. They edged closer to the CEO's orbit, their gaze fixed on him with a mix of determination and apprehension. It was as if they were building up to something, waiting for the perfect moment to act. The interplay of these dynamics created an undercurrent of anticipation, a subtle tension that hummed just beneath the surface of the evening's polished veneer. Guests continued to laugh and mingle, oblivious to the cracks beginning to form in the facade. The girl, caught up in her own dreams and aspirations, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. And the CEO, despite his best efforts to maintain his usual poise, seemed ever so slightly on edge, his focus slipping for brief moments before he pulled it back with practiced ease. It was a delicate balancing act, one that seemed destined to tip over at any moment. As the night wore on, the sense of inevitability grew stronger. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every subtle shift in body language added to the mounting tension. The room, though still filled with laughter and light, began to feel like a stage set for a dramatic reveal. No one could say exactly what was coming, but there was a sense that the perfect evening was teetering on the edge of something unexpected. For the girl, this was supposed to be a night of celebration and affirmation, a step closer to the life she had always dreamed of. For the CEO, it was another opportunity to solidify his image as a man in control, a leader both admired and respected. And for the child, it was something else entirely, a moment they had been waiting for, one that would change everything. The pieces were in place, the stage was set, and the audience was unwittingly poised for the first act of a drama that none of them could have anticipated. The moment it happened, time seemed to stand still. The room, alive with laughter and conversation just seconds before, was plunged into an almost surreal silence. It began innocently enough, a soft, hesitant voice cutting through the cacophony of adult chatter. "Dad!" the child called out, their small frame standing just a few feet away from the center of attention. The word hung in the air, simple yet seismic in its impact. Heads turned in unison, eyes widening as they darted between the child and the CEO. The exclamation was unassuming, free of malice or intent, delivered with the pure, unguarded sincerity only a child could muster. Yet its effect was instant, like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples across the room. The CEO, a man known for his unshakable composure, froze. For a moment, he seemed like a statue, his usually commanding presence shrinking under the weight of the unexpected revelation. His confident smile faltered, replaced by a fleeting expression of shock that he struggled to conceal. It was a rare glimpse behind the mask he wore so effortlessly, a crack in the armor that revealed the vulnerability beneath. His eyes locked onto the child, disbelief and something akin to fear flashing across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for his response, while he grappled with an invisible storm of emotions. The child, oblivious to the chaos they had unleashed, stood their ground, their expression one of innocent certainty. They weren't asking a question or seeking confirmation. They were making a statement, a simple truth as they saw it. Their small face, framed by wide, earnest eyes, betrayed no understanding of the social bombshell they had just dropped. To them, this was a moment of connection, an unguarded attempt to bridge the distance they had felt. But to everyone else, it was something far more profound. A revelation that shattered the carefully curated image of the CEO and set the evening on an entirely new trajectory. Around the room the shockwaves were palpable. Guests who had been mid-conversation fell silent, their words trailing off into nothingness. Eyes widened, brows furrowed, and murmurs of confusion began to ripple through the crowd. Some exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to thinly veiled amusement, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Others stared openly at the CEO, their curiosity sharpened by the sudden, unexpected drama. It was the kind of moment that would be dissected and discussed long after the evening was over, a story that would ripple through social and professional circles with a life of its own. The girl, standing just a few feet away, felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. Her initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just heard. Surely there was some mistake, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. But as the seconds ticked by and the silence stretched on, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her gaze shifted from the child to the CEO, searching his face for an explanation, for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. What she saw instead was hesitation, a momentary flicker of guilt that confirmed her worst fears. The betrayal hit her like a tidal wave, a flood of anger and hurt that threatened to overwhelm her. What is going on?" she finally managed to stammer, her voice trembling as she tried to keep her composure. Her words, though soft, cut through the silence like a knife, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. All eyes turned to the CEO, who now found himself the unwilling focal point of a growing storm. His gaze shifted nervously between the girl and the child, his mind racing to find a way out of the situation. He took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself before finally speaking. "It's complicated," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. But the words felt hollow, inadequate in the face of the truth that had just been revealed. The girl's expression hardened, her disbelief giving way to anger. "Complicated?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly as the weight of his response sank in. "What does that even mean? Who is this child? Why are they calling you Dad?" Each question was sharper than the last, slicing through the facade the CEO had worked so hard to maintain. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady, fueled by the simmering fury that now bubbled just beneath the surface. The CEO hesitated, his usual eloquence deserting him in the face of her pointed questions. He glanced at the child, who now looked slightly uncertain, as if sensing the gravity of the situation for the first time. "I can explain," he said finally, his tone a mix of desperation and resignation. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they wouldn't be enough. The damage had already been done, and no explanation, however carefully crafted, could undo the impact of the child's proclamation. As he struggled to find the right words, the tension in the room continued to build. Guests whispered to one another, their curiosity mingled with a sense of schadenfreude as they watched the drama unfold. Some shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to stay or quietly make their exit. Others leaned in, eager to catch every word of the unfolding confrontation. The once perfect evening had taken on the air of a public spectacle, and there was no escaping the scrutiny of the crowd. The girl, meanwhile, felt her resolve harden. She had entered the evening filled with hope and admiration, envisioning a future that now seemed like a cruel joke. She had trusted him, believed in the image he had presented, only to discover that it was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. Her heart ached, but her pride refused to let her crumble in front of an audience. "You don't need to explain," she said finally, her voice cold and detached. "Not here, not now." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the CEO standing alone in the center of the room, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. The child, sensing the tension but not fully understanding its implications, looked up at the CEO with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Did I do something wrong?" they asked softly, their voice trembling slightly. The question, so simple yet so profound, cut through the noise in his mind, leaving him momentarily speechless. He crouched down to their level, placing a hand gently on their shoulder. "No, you didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "This is just a lot for everyone to process." The evening, once filled with laughter and light, had been irrevocably altered. The child's innocent proclamation had set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone, forcing everyone involved to confront truths they had long sought to avoid. The perfect evening was over, and in its place was a tangled web of emotions, revelations, and consequences that would ripple far beyond the confines of the room. She had always been a dreamer, a woman who believed in love not just as a fleeting emotion but as a transformative force. Her journey to this night had been paved with both heartbreak and hope, each experience shaping her perspective on what she wanted in a partner. Her past relationships had been marred by disappointment, partners who lacked ambition, who couldn't meet her halfway, or who simply didn't see her for who she truly was. She had spent years sifting through the rubble of failed connections, vowing that the next time would be different, that she wouldn't settle for less than what she deserved. And then he had entered her life. From the moment they met, the CEO had seemed like everything she had been waiting for. He was intelligent, accomplished, and charismatic, a man whose presence filled a room. But it wasn't just his professional success that drew her to him, it was the way he made her feel, seen, valued, and important in a way no one else ever had. He had a way of speaking that made her believe in the future they could build together, a future where they were equals, partners in every sense of the word. She had allowed herself to dream again, to imagine a life where love wasn't just a possibility but a promise. This relationship felt different from the start. Unlike her previous experiences, which had been riddled with uncertainty, this one felt solid, like something she could build her life around. He wasn't just a man. He was a vision of stability, someone who seemed to embody the qualities she had always admired but never quite found. He was thoughtful and attentive, the kind of partner who remembered the small details and turned ordinary moments into something special. With him, she felt a sense of security that had eluded her for so long. She had allowed herself to believe that this was it, that she had finally found the person who would stand by her side through all of life's ups and downs. But now, standing in the middle of the lavish dining room, she felt that carefully constructed vision crumbling around her. The child's words, so simple, so unassuming, had torn a hole in the fabric of her reality, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. "Dad." The word echoed in her mind, refusing to fade no matter how hard she tried to push it away. She replayed the moment over and over again, as if dissecting it could somehow make it less real. The child's innocent expression, the CEO's stunned reaction, the silence that followed, it was all too much, a sensory overload that left her feeling like she couldn't breathe. Her emotions swung wildly, pulling her in conflicting directions. There was the disbelief, a voice in her head insisting that there had to be some explanation, that this couldn't be what it seemed. But alongside it was the growing realization that it was exactly what it seemed, that the man she thought she knew had been keeping a part of his life hidden from her. Anger flared up, hot and all-consuming as she thought about the lies, or at the very least the omissions, that had led to this moment. How could he do this to her? How could he stand there, acting as if he cared about her, while hiding something so fundamental about himself? Beneath the anger, however, was a deeper, more painful emotion, hurt. She had trusted him, opened herself up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone else in years. She had let him into her life, shared her dreams and fears, and believed that he had done the same. But now she couldn't help but question everything. How much of what he had told her was real? Had he ever truly seen her as a partner, or had she been just another person to impress, another conquest in a long line of achievements? The thought stung, cutting deeper than she thought possible. As the initial wave of emotion began to subside, she found herself revisiting moments from their relationship that now took on a different light. There had always been little things that didn't quite add up. Odd phone calls he would excuse himself to take, vague answers to certain questions, occasional absences that he brushed off as work-related. At the time, she had dismissed these moments, choosing to trust him rather than let doubt creep in. But now, with the child's proclamation hanging over her like a dark cloud, those moments seemed like glaring red flags she had willfully ignored. She thought back to the way he had always been so composed, so in control, even in situations that would have flustered most people. She had admired that about him, seen it as a sign of his strength and capability. But now she wondered if it had been something else entirely, a mask he wore to keep people from getting too close, to keep his secrets safe. The thought made her stomach churn. Had she ever really known him, or had she fallen in love with an idea, a carefully curated image that he had crafted for the world to see? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. His hesitation when she brought up the future, the way he always seemed to steer conversations away from personal topics, his reluctance to introduce her to certain people in his life, it all made sense now in the worst possible way. She felt a pang of regret for not pressing harder, for not trusting her instincts when they told her something was off. But how could she have known? He had been so convincing, so careful to present himself as the perfect partner. And she had wanted to believe him, wanted so desperately for this to be the real thing. As the evening wore on, she felt the weight of the betrayal settling heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the child or the secret he had kept. It was about the trust that had been broken, the foundation of their relationship that now felt irreparably damaged. She had given him her heart, and in return, he had given her a carefully constructed illusion. The realization was devastating, leaving her feeling hollow and adrift in a sea of uncertainty. And yet, amid the pain and anger, there was also a flicker of resolve. She knew she couldn't let this define her, couldn't let his betrayal rob her of the strength she had worked so hard to build. She had survived heartbreak before, and she would survive this too. But first she needed answers. She needed to hear his side of the story, to understand why he had kept this part of his life hidden from her. Not because she wanted to salvage their relationship, she wasn't sure that was even possible, but because she needed closure. She needed to know that she hadn't been a fool for believing in him, even if it turned out she had been wrong about who he truly was. With that thought, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. The night wasn't over, and neither was the conversation they needed to have. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let this moment define her. She was stronger than that, and she would find a way to move forward, even if it meant leaving him behind. The CO sat in silence, his mind swirling with thoughts as the events of the evening unfolded before him. For a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, from the boardroom to his meticulously curated public image, the dinner party had become an unmitigated disaster. The word "Dad," spoken with innocent candor by the child, had shattered the carefully constructed walls he had spent years building. In that moment, his past, present, and future collided, leaving him to grapple with a truth he had long kept hidden. He felt a storm of emotions, guilt, regret, and fear, none of which he could escape no matter how much he wanted to. He thought back to the woman who had changed his life in ways he couldn't have foreseen, the child's mother. She had been vibrant, ambitious, and fiercely independent, someone who had matched his drive and challenged his views. They had met during the early years of his career, a time when he was hungry for success and willing to make sacrifices to achieve it. Their relationship had been intense and passionate, but also marked by a fundamental tension. She had wanted a partner who would be present, someone who could balance ambition with family life. He, on the other hand, had been consumed by his work, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to step back from the demands of his burgeoning career. When she had told him about the pregnancy, his reaction had been far from ideal. He hadn't been ready to become a father, hadn't known how to reconcile the prospect of parenthood with the relentless pursuit of his goals. Their relationship, already strained, had unraveled under the weight of their differing priorities. She had made the painful decision to raise the child on her own, while he had retreated into his work, burying his feelings under layers of ambition and detachment. Over time, he had convinced himself that keeping his distance was the best way to protect everyone involved. The child deserved stability, something he couldn't offer in his current life. And so, he had kept his role in their life minimal, a distant presence rather than an active participant. But that distance hadn't erased the guilt. It lingered in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of the choices he had made and the people he had hurt. He had told himself it was for the best, that his absence would shield the child from the complexities of his world. Yet deep down he knew it was also about self-preservation. Admitting to his role as a father would mean confronting a part of himself he had worked hard to ignore. The part that feared vulnerability, that saw emotional connection as a weakness. When he had met the girl, he hadn't intended to fall for her. She had been a breath of fresh air, someone who saw beyond his title and success to the person beneath. Her warmth and sincerity had drawn him in, challenging his belief that relationships were distractions he couldn't afford. For the first time in years, he had allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future, one where he didn't have to choose between love and ambition. But even as he opened himself up to her, he had kept his past a secret. It wasn't just about protecting his reputation, it was about protecting her from the complications of his life. Or so he had told himself. In truth, it was fear that held him back. Fear of rejection, of losing the connection they had built. He had seen how much she admired him, how she believed in the vision of the man he presented to the world. Admitting the truth about his child felt like a risk he couldn't take, a revelation that could shatter the trust they had built. And so, he had chosen silence, hoping that the past would remain buried and that their relationship could exist in a bubble, untouched by the messiness of his history. But that bubble had burst and there was no going back. As he sat alone, replaying the moment in his mind, he knew he had to confront the consequences of his choices. The girl deserved the truth and he owed it to her, and to himself, to face the situation head-on. Summoning his courage, he sought her out, finding her standing by a window, her back to him as she gazed out into the night. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy silence that spoke volumes about the emotions they were both grappling with. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his voice low but steady. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. "You think?" she replied, her tone sharp but not unexpected. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. "There's no excuse for keeping this from you," he admitted. "But I need you to understand why." He told her everything, about his past relationship, the child's mother, and the choices that had led him to this moment. He spoke of his fear, his guilt, and the reasons he had convinced himself that secrecy was the best option. He didn't sugarcoat the truth, knowing that honesty was the only way to salvage even a shred of the trust they had shared. As he spoke, he watched her expression shift, the anger giving way to something more complex. Disappointment, perhaps, but also a glimmer of understanding. When he finished, there was a long pause, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally, her voice soft but tinged with emotion. "I trusted you. I thought I knew you." Her words cut deep, but he didn't flinch. He had no defense, no justification that could undo the hurt he had caused. "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to be honest about something I've spent so long trying to avoid." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. "I need time," she said finally, her gaze searching his for a moment before turning away. "I need to figure out what this means, for us, for everything." He nodded, understanding that the road ahead would be uncertain at best. He had taken a step toward redemption, but whether it would lead to forgiveness or finality was a question only time could answer. As he watched her walk away, he felt a strange mix of emotions, relief at having finally told the truth, but also an overwhelming sense of loss. The evening had forced him to confront not just the secrets he had kept, but also the man he had become. For so long, he had equated success with control, believing that he could compartmentalize his life without consequence. But now he realized that love and ambition didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The girl had shown him that, even if it had taken a painful revelation for him to see it. Whether or not she would give him another chance was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back to the man he had been. The only way forward was through honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to embrace the messiness of life, and love. The air between them crackled with tension as they sat across from each other in a secluded corner of the sprawling estate, away from the prying eyes of the dinner guests. The glittering chandeliers and muted conversations of the party felt like a distant world compared to the storm brewing between them. The girl's face was flushed with emotion, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the armrests of her chair. The CEO, usually so composed and self-assured, looked vulnerable for the first time since she'd known him. His eyes, filled with a mixture of regret and desperation, searched hers for some sign of forgiveness. But she wasn't ready to offer that, not yet and perhaps not ever. "This isn't just about the child," she began, her voice low but steady, cutting through the silence like a knife. "It's about trust. It's about the fact that you kept something so important from me, something that changes everything." How am I supposed to believe anything you've said to me when you've been hiding this part of your life? Her words were sharp, each one landing with the weight of her pain. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind ever since the child's proclamation, but now that it was happening, the rawness of her emotions took her by surprise. I didn't want to lose you, he replied, his voice cracking slightly. I was scared that if I told you the truth you'd walk away. I know it was wrong. I know I should have been honest with you from the start, but I thought. You thought you could lie your way into keeping me? She interrupted, her tone rising with frustration. Do you even hear yourself? Do you know how insulting that is? You didn't give me a choice. You decided for me, and that's not love. That's control. He flinched at her words, the truth of them hitting harder than he cared to admit. You're right, he said after a pause, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the evening had finally broken through his defenses. You're absolutely right. I was selfish and I made a terrible mistake. I can't undo what I've done, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Caring about someone isn't enough. If it were, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. You can't build a relationship on half-truths and omissions, no matter how good your intentions are. Trust is everything. Respect is everything. And you've shown me that I can't rely on you for either. Her words stung, but they were spoken with a clarity that left no room for argument. He wanted to fight for her, to tell her that they could work through this, that the love they shared was worth saving. But deep down he knew she was right. His choices had created a chasm between them, one that no amount of apologies or promises could bridge. I didn't want to lose you, he said again, his voice quieter this time, as if the admission itself was an act of surrender. But I see now that by hiding the truth I've already lost you. Her eyes softened for a brief moment, a flicker of the affection they had shared passing through her gaze. She still cared for him, she couldn't deny that. But caring for someone and staying with them were two very different things. I wish things were different, she said softly, her voice laced with sorrow. I really do. I wanted this to work. I wanted us to work. But I can't stay in a relationship where I'm constantly wondering what else you're hiding. I deserve better than that. He nodded slowly, the gravity of her words sinking in. You do, he said simply, his voice heavy with regret. You deserve someone who's honest with you, someone who doesn't let fear get in the way of being the partner you need. I wish I could be that person for you. I really do. The sincerity in his voice tugged at her heart, but it wasn't enough to change her decision. She had spent too much of her life settling for less than she deserved, and she couldn't allow herself to do it again, not even for him. I'm not doing this to hurt you, she said, her tone softening. I'm doing this because I have to. For me. For my own self-respect. She stood then, her movements deliberate and purposeful. You asked me to trust you and I did. But trust isn't something you can take for granted. It's something you earn every single day. And when you break it, it's almost impossible to get it back. Her final words lingered in the air, a powerful statement that encapsulated the depth of her hurt and the strength of her resolve. I hope you learn from this, she said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. I hope you become the man you're capable of being. But I can't be the one to wait around and see if that happens. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, a man stripped of his usual confidence and bravado. He watched her go, the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance, each one a painful reminder of what he had lost. He wanted to call out to her, to beg her to stay, but he knew it would be futile. She had made her decision, and he had no choice but to accept it. As the room grew quiet, he sank into the chair she had vacated, his mind racing with thoughts of what could have been. The regret was almost unbearable, a heavy weight pressing down on him as he replayed the evening's events over and over in his mind. He had been given a chance at something real, something meaningful, and he had squandered it with his fear and dishonesty. But even as the pain of her departure settled in, there was a part of him that understood why she had done what she did. Her decision wasn't just about his mistakes, it was about her strength, her unwillingness to compromise on what she deserved. And though it hurt more than he thought possible, he couldn't help but admire her for it. For the first time in a long time he felt truly humbled. He had lost someone he cared about deeply, but he had also learned a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Trust and respect weren't just ideals, they were the foundation of any meaningful relationship. Without them, even the strongest love couldn't survive. And while he couldn't change the past, he could choose to carry those lessons with him into the future, whatever it might hold. The morning after the dinner party felt heavy with unspoken words and lingering emotions, but for the girl, it marked the beginning of a new chapter. She sat in her modest apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the journal in her lap. Writing had always been her refuge, a way to process the complexities of her life. As she pressed pen to paper, she reflected on the whirlwind that had been her relationship with the CEO, the highs and lows that had brought her to this point. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but beneath it was a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so much of her life trying to mold herself into what she thought others wanted. A partner who could adapt, a woman who didn't demand too much. This relationship had been no different. At first, the CEO's confidence and ambition had captivated her, making her believe in a future filled with possibility. But as she looked back now, she realized how much she had ignored the subtle signs, the small cracks in their foundation that hinted at deeper issues. She had been so eager to believe in the idea of them that she had overlooked the reality. The breakup, though painful, had forced her to confront these truths. It wasn't just about him hiding the existence of his child, it was about the pattern of compromises she had made in her life. She resolved to stop settling for half-truths and relationships that left her questioning her worth. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a wake-up call. And while it hurt, it was also liberating. She began focusing on herself, reconnecting with hobbies she had set aside and spending time with friends who reminded her of her strength and worth. She also took time to reflect on the positive aspects of the relationship. Despite its flaws, it had taught her valuable lessons about love, trust, and self-respect. She realized that love wasn't enough to sustain a partnership. There had to be honesty, respect, and a willingness to be vulnerable. The CEO's choices had hurt her, but they had also shown her what she would no longer tolerate. And for that she was grateful. Meanwhile, the CEO was embarking on a journey of his own. The fallout from the dinner party had forced him to reevaluate not only his relationship but his entire approach to life. He spent hours reflecting on the choices that had brought him to this point, the decisions that had prioritized his ambition at the expense of his personal connections. For so long he had believed that success meant control, that vulnerability was a weakness he couldn't afford. But now he saw how misguided that belief had been. His first step toward redemption was reaching out to his child. The boy's innocent proclamation at the dinner party had exposed the truth he had spent years avoiding, and it was time to face it head-on. The initial conversations were awkward, filled with tentative questions and hesitant answers. But as days turned into weeks, the CEO began to see the world through his child's eyes, a world of simplicity, where love and acceptance didn't come with conditions or caveats. Spending time with the child became a priority, and through their interactions he started to rediscover parts of himself he had long buried. They played soccer in the park, built model airplanes, and shared stories over ice cream. These moments weren't just about bonding, they were about healing. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel, to be present in a way he hadn't been since his career had taken over his life. He began to understand that being a father wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, about being there for the small, everyday moments that mattered most. In parallel, he sought therapy, a step he had once dismissed as unnecessary. Through those sessions, he confronted the fears and insecurities that had driven his actions. He admitted to himself that his ambition had often been a shield, a way to avoid the vulnerability of deep connections. The therapist helped him see that his fear of failure wasn't limited to his career. It extended to his personal life, where he had avoided risks that might expose his flaws. He also reached out to the girl, not to ask for reconciliation but to express his gratitude and regret. In a heartfelt letter, he acknowledged the ways he had hurt her and thanked her for holding him accountable. He didn't expect a response and he didn't need one. Writing the letter was an act of closure for himself, a way to honor the lessons he had learned and the person she had been to him. For the child, the events of the dinner party and its aftermath were less dramatic and more curious. In his innocent mind, calling the CEO dad had been as natural as breathing. He didn't understand the complexity of the adult's reactions or the weight of the secrets that had been revealed. All he knew was that his father, once a distant figure, was now a part of his life in a way that felt real and comforting. The child's perspective was refreshingly simple. To him, love wasn't about perfection or grand gestures. It was about presence. It was about the way his father listened to his stories, cheered for him at soccer games, and tucked him in at night. These moments, so ordinary yet so profound, became the foundation of their relationship. And though he didn't have the words to articulate it, the child could sense that his father was changing, becoming someone who valued love and connection as much as success. In the end, the girl, the CEO, and the child each found their own paths forward, shaped by the events of that fateful evening. For the girl, It was a journey of self-discovery and empowerment, a chance to redefine her life on her terms. For the CEO, it was a process of growth and redemption, an opportunity to become a better father and a better man. And for the child, it was simply life, a world filled with love, learning, and the boundless possibilities of childhood. Though their lives would never be the same, each of them emerged stronger, wiser, and more attuned to what truly mattered. The dinner party had been a turning point, a moment of chaos that unraveled the threads of their old lives and allowed them to weave new ones. And while the future remained uncertain, they faced it with a renewed sense of purpose and the hope that, in time, they would find the happiness they each deserved. The dinner party had been the catalyst for unraveling a complex web of emotions, secrets, and relationships. In its wake, the event served as a profound reminder of the importance of trust and honesty in human connections. Secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, often carry the weight of betrayal, eroding the very foundation on which relationships are built. The CEO's decision to withhold the truth about his child had been driven by fear of rejection, fear of losing someone he loved, but it had ultimately cost him the very relationship he sought to protect. The girl, on the other hand, had placed her trust in him, only to find it shattered in a moment of revelation. It was a painful lesson for them both, but one that would shape their futures in meaningful ways. As the girl reflected on her journey, she found solace in the clarity that the breakup had brought her. The relationship had been a whirlwind of emotions, filled with highs that made her believe in the possibility of love and lows that left her questioning her worth. But it had also been a turning point, forcing her to confront her own patterns of settling for less than she deserved. She realized that trust and honesty weren't optional, they were essential. And while the end of the relationship had been heartbreaking, it had also been liberating. She began to build a life that was entirely her own, pursuing her passions and dreams with a newfound confidence. Her personal growth extended beyond her career and hobbies. She became more intentional in her relationships, surrounding herself with people who valued her for who she was. The breakup taught her to set boundaries and prioritize her well-being, and these lessons became the foundation for a brighter future. Though the love she had shared with the CEO was now a memory, it remained a bittersweet reminder of her strength and resilience. For the CEO, the fallout from the dinner party marked the beginning of a transformation he never anticipated. Losing the girl forced him to confront the flaws in his approach to life and relationships. The ambitious drive that had once been his defining trait now felt hollow without meaningful connections to ground him. Through therapy and introspection, he began to rebuild himself, not just as a businessman but as a father and a person capable of vulnerability. His relationship with his child became a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. The simple, joyful moments they shared taught him the value of presence and authenticity. In time, the bond between them grew stronger, becoming a source of pride and fulfillment he had never experienced before. The CEO also carried the lessons from his relationship with the girl into his future interactions. He made a conscious effort to prioritize honesty, recognizing that true connection required a willingness to be seen, flaws and all. The ending of their story wasn't a fairy tale, but it wasn't entirely tragic either. It was a bittersweet conclusion to a chapter that had been both beautiful and painful. The girl and the CEO parted ways, not with animosity, but with an unspoken understanding that their paths were no longer aligned. Their love, though imperfect, had been real, and it had left an indelible mark on both of them. As time passed, their individual successes hinted at a hopeful future. The girl found herself thriving in her personal and professional life, her confidence and independence shining brighter than ever. The CEO too discovered a new sense of balance, one that allowed him to nurture his relationships while pursuing his ambitions. Though their lives no longer intersected, there was a quiet sense of closure in knowing that they had each grown from the experience. In the end, the dinner party wasn't just a moment of upheaval, it was a catalyst for transformation. It illuminated the fragility of trust, the weight of honesty, and the power of self-discovery. While the girl and the CEO's story didn't end with them together, it left behind a legacy of lessons that would shape their futures for the better. And in that, there was hope, not just for them but for anyone seeking love, redemption, and the courage to be true to themselves.